Hello and welcome to the Frame Systems and MSO Environment webinar, sponsored today by Matrix Wand. I'm Krista McNamara, Managing Editor of ABRN Magazine, and I'll be your moderator. With a wide variety of frame system options on the market today, it might be hard to know what works best in the MSO environment. So today we have with us Darrell Amberson, Director of MSO Relations with ABRN and VP of Operations with LaMettry's Collision, and Shawn Collins, Senior Tech Service Engineer with 3M and an iCar instructor. Darrell and Shawn will discuss selecting equipment for your business, taking into account shop certifications, insurance requirements, building layout and clientele, all aimed at helping you to determine what best meets your needs. Darrell and Shawn, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Krista. This is Darrell. I want to start out by giving a disclaimer. While we utilize many photos of specific racks, benches, and measuring systems in this presentation, as well as statements from many manufacturers and suppliers of equipment, we are not endorsing any brand or style of equipment. Photos and statements were used strictly to give current perspectives and trends for repairing and measuring auto frame and structural damage in professional collision repair facilities. Shawn?
Sure. Yeah, let's talk about our options here. I'm going to start on the right-hand column here. Are we on slide 4 there, Darrell?
We are on slide 3, I believe. 4, you're right, 4.
Okay, this is your slide where we came from, correct?
No, the other way around. This is yours.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. So where we came from, measuring full frames. Then we went to the unitized vehicles. And as we know, with the changes in the vehicle structures, the tolerances are much tighter than they used to be. So we used to have very loose tolerances where we had plenty of adjustment in our suspension systems where we could, kind of move things around a little bit, had a little wiggle room. And the way they're building vehicles today, we just no longer have that option. So we've come a long way in what we're doing. We used to be able to also make adjustments in sheet metal. Things like shims or slotted holes, things of that nature, and those things have just gone by the wayside. So we need a much more accurate measuring system, and we're going to take a good look at some of these options and kind of discuss really all the considerations that you need to think about before you purchase some of this equipment or bring it into your shop. So that's the goal today, is to just get you to think about all these different considerations.
Look at our options. Just to put things in a nutshell and perspective, especially for those of you who may not be familiar with it, we have all sorts of different pieces of equipment that are used in our shops today. We have drive-on racks, benches, and they come in different sizes and shapes. We have all sorts of different measuring systems, electronic, mechanical, and a number of different styles and sizes. To start out with, we have an illustration here of a drive-on rack, and again, this is kind of simplistic for those of you who may not be as familiar. The photographs here show a couple of examples of drive-on racks just so you can put it in perspective and understand in your mind what we're talking about. These are racks where the vehicle is typically driven up on. The photograph on the top shows a scissors lift where the vehicle has been elevated, or the rack, in other words, brought up and made level for working purposes. The lower photograph shows where a rack has been lowered to make it easy to put the vehicle onto the rack. You can see the pulling posts on the top system, which are attached. The lower system, the pulling posts are removable. Both conceptually do the same sort of thing, where the rack that the vehicle is driven up on acts as the brace, and the pulling posts are the leverage, so to speak, where chains and other devices are hooked onto to actually pull the damage. Shawn?
Yeah, then we've got our benches. And my background is as a technician. I was a tech for 25 years, and I can tell you we've come a long ways with these bench systems. One of the first ones I ever worked on was a Blackhawk dedicated system where you had these gigantic, heavy fixtures. It was a real complicated setup. A lot of the vehicle had to be disassembled to be able to use these fixtures. It just wasn't a real user-friendly situation. It took you just about a whole day just to bench a vehicle. So, that was the old system, the old fixture bench. Very complex, and again, a lot of suspension and other parts had to be removed, which made it very difficult. So now we've got a lot more different styles that are much more user-friendly. Maybe a particular machine recommended by the OEM. So that would probably be one of your first considerations to think about is what kind of OEM programs or networks that you're working with. And that would be, something that you would definitely want to consider before you purchase a system, that you're buying something that's going to be useful for your OEM recommendations. But these systems are becoming more universal. The OEMs have begun to accept more universal jigs, which is a good thing. The universal jigs allow for a lot more flexibility. They allow you to interchange the tops where they actually fit into the control points on the vehicle without changing the entire jig. So it's a much easier setup. You don't have to remove nearly the parts, suspension parts, et cetera, to jig the vehicle. And that's what we're starting to see, where they have the removable tops, and then they have a piston that can slide up and down within that jig, and then a base. So all these parts are individual, and they're much lighter and easier for the technicians to handle as well. There's a fatigue issue with any of these frame systems, and the lighter and more versatile they are, the easier it is for the tech as well. But these are adjustable for much easier setup. They're used in conjunction a lot of times now with some kind of a blueprinting, damage, discovery electronic measuring system. So a lot of the shops that have a bench also have some type of electronic system where they can do a quick blueprinting measurement as well. So we're going to see throughout this session here that it may be a necessary option to have more than one system, one for actually measuring during repairs and one system for measuring during the blueprinting process. So several brands have these multiple options.
Shawn, if I understand right, I'm looking at the photographs here. I know we're going to get into more detail in terms of measuring systems, but it looks like the photograph on the top has got a more of a fixture underneath, and looks like flags underneath the lower photograph, under the vehicle in the lower photograph. So that'd be more of a electronic, more of a universal measuring system. Is that correct?
Yeah, right. The lower picture is the vehicle's actually sitting on a jig bench, but you can see the computer sitting there in front of the vehicle. And that system, you could do both. You could actually use the jigs on the bench, or for the estimating, you could hang the targets and do a much quicker blueprinting estimate. So yeah, you have both options there.
Thank you. And again, to elaborate on what we were just talking about, this shows in a little better detail the mechanical measuring system here. In other words, you can see the fixtures that are attached to the rack, or I'm sorry, to the bench, to be technically correct. And if I can see accurately, it looks like those fixtures have some adjustment at the top. There are a couple different types of fixtures. There are some that are more dedicated to a specific style of vehicle. You perhaps may have to either purchase those or rent them from the manufacturer. Or there are some manufacturers that provide some that are more universal in nature that allow you to slide the pointers up and down and adjust them around to put them in some specific position that will make them correct for that specific vehicle. Shawn?
So now we're looking at electronic measuring, and as you know, we have many, many different styles for this. What we're looking at in the picture there is what I would term a point-and-click system. You basically touch a few of the control points, and it quickly maps out the structure of the vehicle with very little or no disassembly. So depending on the system, you may be able to do a much quicker evaluation than with other systems that require more disassembly. These are very accurate, these electronic systems, even if the car is not level. And that's one thing you want to check into when considering a machine or a system is does the vehicle need to be perfectly level? In some older systems, they may need to. In some of the newer systems, they actually take into account that it's not level, and if it, for example, has hanging targets, it does the geometry to figure how those targets have shifted and makes the adjustments. So that's something that's very important, because most of these blueprinting estimates are going to be done maybe on a two-post lift in an estimating bay where chances are the vehicle won't be level. So that's something to think about. The other thing to think about with these systems is to be sure they have printout capability. The insurance companies now would like to have a before and after measurement, and these electronic systems, that's the one big advantage over the mechanical systems, where some of the mechanical systems, there really is no printout capability. So another consideration. These can also be done by an estimator or a damage appraiser. So it's not necessarily just the technician that can do these blueprinting measurements. This can be done by an estimator as well in that estimating bay. So there's broad capabilities to these machines. Some of them include being able to do upper body measurements and even some suspension measurements. And that's, as a technician, one of the things I would want to be able to do is do some kind of a wheel alignment quick check. In some of these systems, you can actually do comparative side-by-side measurements by touching a few of the suspension parts, just to make sure that, number one, the structure is straight, and number two, that you don't have any kind of suspension problem that's going to come back and haunt you downstream in the repair process.
So, Shawn, do I understand it right? We've got two basic electronic measuring systems, kind of this point-and-click type and the other type that's with the flags underneath. What do you think? Pros and cons? I assume the point-and-click is quicker to set up, but the flag system would probably give you more dimensions at any given time once it is set up. Is that accurate? Right.
That's a great question, too. And most of the point-and-click systems still allow you to use that during pulling. For example, the machine we're looking at there has a little magnetic base that you can attach to the main control point that you're trying to bring back into alignment, and you can actually follow that pull and see where it's going as you're pulling. But the downfall with that is you only have that one data point. You don't have multiples. So the advantage of the targets or flags is you have multiple data points to look at. Some of the disadvantages of the targets is sometimes some targets get in the way of others. Some of the systems have ways of overcoming that, where you can freeze the system and remove a target, et cetera. So, yeah, there are definitely advantages and disadvantages either way, and that's something you really want to ask a lot of questions when you're looking at a machine like that.
And now we'd like to ask the audience a polling question about their measuring system habits. You can respond online by clicking right on your screen. So our question is, do you utilize a formal measuring system during the blueprint process? And if so, is that system electronic? Please select one of the following responses. No, I don't use a formal measuring system. Yes, I use a formal measuring system, but it is not electronic. Yes, I use a formal measuring system, and it is electronic. Or I don't work in a collision repair facility. And just as a reminder, if you have any questions throughout the webinar, please enter them using your Q&A tab. We will take time at the end to address questions you have. Okay, so it looks like the majority of our respondents today do not work in a collision repair facility, but of those that do, a third use a formal measuring system, and it is electronic. Now back to Darrell and Shawn.
Let's get into a discussion of how do we choose a rack or a bench? In the preparation of this presentation, we reached out to a number of manufacturers. We're, again, as we said in the disclaimer, trying to be very cautious about not endorsing any particular system, so please keep in mind that that is not our intent, but also understand that manufacturers represent the most current knowledge in terms of what's out there right now. And we found some very interesting responses. I don't want to strictly go through and read every single line by line. You can see those on your screen. But I am going to get into some of the points that were made specifically by these people, and so I will read some of it so that we get some understanding of what their perspectives are. And as we go on to this, you'll find that there is some commonality in the responses, and you also find some significant differences between the different manufacturers' perspectives of how to fix the car and what we're going to see in the future. Craig Totten of Carbench gave us a lot of great information, and I'm going to use some of his phrases here. As he says, the days of using a drive-on rack for everyone are over. Newer vehicles require more than a 4-point rocker sill clamp holding. They're talking about more points that holding the vehicle down when we're doing the pulling. Vehicles are being built to more precise tolerances. We've known that for some time, but as he's saying that some of the specifications now are as low as the tolerances, I should say, are as low as 1 millimeter. He says a welding a part without fixturing will allow it to walk. At some point, some type of multi-point fixtures will be required. He said a large shop could have a drive-on rack for sheet metal pulls and a bench for fixturing or structural repairs. And he also states that an MSO could dedicate one facility to specialty repair, such as an OEM certification that requires a certain brand of equipment. As you know, that's why we're reaching out to the MSOs, is that it's a little different business model than the single shop operator, and often MSO operators look at things differently. So the MSO operator has the opportunity to think in those kind of terms of specialization from one shop to another. And what Craig is saying here, that you can contour your equipment capabilities to specific needs in different geographic areas and different shops. Shawn?
Actually, I had that as my screen, but I just wanted to elaborate on that a little bit as well. We see several different opinions, and they're all valid. It kind of depends on what's right for your organization and which considerations are most important for your organization as well. The industry is seeing less opportunity for repair, and that's kind of what Craig was referring to as far as being able to hold a vehicle or jig a vehicle and hold it in place during that repair. We're seeing less opportunity for repair and more replacement. So we're going to see larger sections of the vehicle being replaced, which means we're going to cut away larger sections, which allows the structure to, if it's not clamped and held properly, the structure can move quite a bit once these parts are cut off. And they can also move, as he stated, as a part is being welded. You've got that heat input that can change things as well. So it's going to be more and more important with these ultra-high strength steels and other substrates like aluminum that we're able to hold these vehicles in place securely without any of those control points moving as we make that repair. We're going to see more replacement of large components like rails and rocker panels. So, this fixturing is going to become more and more important all the time, and that's why we're starting to see more of a trend towards these fixtures, whether you have other equipment in your shop or not. It may be necessary to at least have one system where you can fixture the vehicle for the larger repairs. You've got the more anchoring points to secure it as well for these harder steels and stronger structures. It's not easy to anchor a vehicle on the pinch welds and then pull on some of these high-strength steel parts. You have too much movement in the pinch weld, so you need a lot of control points to grab on and hold that vehicle secure while we pull. It may be a good option as well to have a bench if you're an MSO, maybe in one of your locations, maybe not every location, but have a fixture bench in one of them in certain geographical areas where if you run into that type of a repair, you've got the equipment to be able to do it.
Thank you, Shawn. Chief, Representative Chief gave us some information, and by their perspectives, they wanted to emphasize three particular areas: repair quality, estimate accuracy, and cycle times. They're saying that you should consider a light teardown rack for blueprinting and light work. Interesting that seems to be kind of a common theme being developed here for that blueprinting process. But Chief's suggestion is more to consider what we might consider more traditional drive-on racks for all of those needs. So they're suggesting a light teardown rack for that, and a larger one perhaps for the heavier hits and more sophisticated repairs. They're also stating the importance of the 360-degree pulling, and talking about the capability of pulling simultaneously, utilizing equalized pressure so that you can make more complex pulls at the same time on the rack.
Yeah, are you done, Darrell?
Yes.
I just wanted to comment on that as well, and kind of from a personal situation where I worked at a shop where the owner didn't really get a lot of input from the technicians before he got equipment. And there was a purchase made, and the towers, the polling posts on this equipment did not equalize together, and it made it very difficult to use. And to be perfectly honest, a lot of the technicians did everything they could to avoid using that piece of equipment. So I would really emphasize that, of course, you're not going to take everything your technicians tell you. They probably want the most expensive equipment out there, but their considerations are very important as well. You don't want to buy equipment that they don't want to use. So a really good idea to at least get some input from your technicians before you make a major purchase like that.
Great point, Shawn. Would you like to take the next one?
Sure. Another perspective from Spinisi. And this perspective emphasizes versatility. So they're talking about, being able to do multiple things and maximize your floor space. So you want to consider equipment that can be used throughout the entire process, from the damage discovery right down to the structural straightening. And some equipment can be used, the same piece of equipment, all the way through. Some you may need to use different pieces of equipment. So that's really something to think about. It also mentions that you can work at a comfortable working height, and ergonomics are very important as well. And again, from a technician standpoint, the size and weight of fixtures is important. There's a fatigue factor here, and being able to, raise and lower the rack to a good working level, have things that aren't super heavy to haul around, is something to consider. Does it, raise and lower? Some of these racks really don't, where you have to jump up and down and hop up and off these frame racks, all day long if you're doing a major repair. And again, that fatigue can really wear the techs down. Flow in the facility is a consideration as well. The ease of mechanical parts removal. So can you use the same rack? Are you able to pull mechanical parts like the engine on that rack if need be? Or does it have to then come off and then go back on the rack? There's at least one system where you can actually leave the vehicle on the jigs and roll it back and forth on the rack, so you could roll it far enough forward to remove mechanical or engine parts. So that's really a major consideration as well. Also, sharing of some of the clamps is important to consider. You can purchase clamps for the most popular models and then maybe share those clamps amongst all the shops in that geographical area. So some economy of scale should be considered, where when you're a larger organization, that you don't have to have everything in every shop. You can exchange equipment back and forth. Portability is something as well, where some racks can be moved from one bay to another, which is very handy. Some of them are stationary, and you can't do that. So there are some portable racks, and you can roll them, into different bays, or you can even sometimes roll them right into a prep station for a major repair. And after all the parts are welded on, you can jam it in that prep station and then roll it back out. So a lot of important considerations that Spinizzi mentions here.
Interesting considerations. How often do you find that shops need to make that one extra pull? Maybe you've made some the pulls, you think you've got all the structural areas square, but maybe in an upper body area you start fitting sheet metal and you find something needs to be tugged a little bit more.
Hopefully that doesn't happen, but unfortunately, yeah, sure, that does happen every once in a while. Things can actually move where, like on a side repair, sometimes you may have everything perfectly square, and after the car's set down and things move around a little bit, things can shift a little, and you can't get your gaps exactly the way you had them before it was painted or whatever. So yeah, that is a consideration as well. If you have to go through the whole process again, and it's a difficult process, it's really going to slow down that cycle time. So yeah, the ease of being able to hook it back up and make a quick pull is another consideration for sure.
Perspectives from Wendy Brushow of Carolina. The growth of manufacturer-certified collision repair programs, it's critical to the MSO to base their investment decision upon industry demands. I think it's interesting that how much influence the OEs are having on our industry now. If I'm not mistaken, in Europe, they've had even more influence in the past, and I think we're starting to see more and more as vehicles are becoming more and more sophisticated. She makes the point that large MSOs are outfitting multiple shops and placing orders and tend to purchase a quantity and variety of equipment for this purpose. Some of these manufacturers sell other things as well as welders and other pieces of equipment, so there are opportunities when an MSO can form a relationship with a given manufacturer and maybe buy quantities of equipment. It might be, as I said, welders and frame racks and benches and all the same sort of things from the same manufacturer, utilizing their strength of size of scale and purchasing power, and then also standardizing their systems, their shops, by doing that. Often keeping equipment consistent among locations is the point I was making in terms of maintaining standard processes. Many MSOs have standard operating procedures among shops, might even move technicians among shops depending upon their needs. So there again, consistency of equipment can be helpful. And she makes the point it's interesting that auto manufacturers have different approaches to equipping shops even to the point of drive-on racks versus benches, as well as one system versus multiple systems for different applications. That's a big point in this presentation, that we're seeing this different needs and having different types of equipment to satisfy those needs. And that is one of the reasons why we utilize the perspectives of these different equipment manufacturers, because they can bring all those different perspectives and different types of equipment. In other words, there's no one set solution or one standard answer for all of our pulling needs and measuring needs as well.
So the gist of this slide here is that vehicle construction has changed. The way the vehicles are being built now, you've got the front end of the vehicle, where the front portion of the frame rail, for example, is either a softer or a thinner type of metal that allows for energy absorption. Beyond that, you've got a much stiffer frame rail from the suspension point back that is designed to actually transfer collision energy back into softer parts of the vehicle, like the cowl area or the floor area in the case of a rear rail. So the construction materials have changed, and it's really changed how we look at damage and how we can view damage, and we're starting to see fewer visible damage indicators like buckles in frame rails, things of that nature, where in the past, if a frame rail got hit, there was usually an obvious buckle. Well, a lot of times we see now in certain collisions where you don't see that because the damage has transferred into the softer, less conspicuous areas like the cowl or the floor. There's an example we use in one of our iCar classes, and it's a Honda that was hit in the front. It basically looked like it hit a deer. Wasn't a major hit, took out the headlight, damaged the fender, and that was a great example because looking at that vehicle, it really didn't look like there was structural damage, but by the time everything was eventually measured, the whole entire rail moved back 5 millimeters into the cowl. So that would be your worst case scenario, that if you didn't measure that vehicle because you did not see those visible damage indicators, you were going to have problems downstream. So again, your worst nightmare, the car's already done, it's painted, you go to do a wheel alignment, now you can't do that. You've got to reattach the vehicle to the bench. It's already been painted. The customer's been promised a pickup date. And basically you have to admit to the customer that you didn't do a thorough job of measuring their vehicle, which is going to lose a lot of confidence with that customer. So there may be situations where measuring may be justified even if there are no visible damage indicators. And we're starting to see that more and more often because of this changing construction. So I always say, hey, when in doubt, measure, because there are going to be situations where you're not going to see visible damage, but there are going to be minor structural misalignments, but they're major enough where you won't be able to complete the car because you can't align it.
Shawn?
Yep.
Another statement from Craig Totten regarding measurement systems. He says with 1 millimeter tolerances, some type of multi-point fixture is going to be required for structural repairs. He's talking about having more than one type of equipment in the shop and utilizing the need for measurement equipment that can quickly and efficiently measure a vehicle structure during the estimating or blueprinting phase of the repair. This just kind of dovetails onto what Shawn was just talking about, the need for measurement. It is increasingly difficult to visually observe what is damaged and what is not, and hence the importance of creating some real data that we can use rather than speculating on damage, so that we know going into the repair if there is any pulling requirement or not. He also makes the point of the vehicle being level, and I know Shawn talked on that before. There are some systems that require that the vehicle be level and some not so much. So be careful when you're shopping for equipment that you understand that necessity, whether it exists or not, so that you can equip the shop accordingly. Krista?
Now we'd like to do our second and last polling question that, again, you can respond to right on your screen. Do you have a dedicated area for blueprinting? Please select one of the following responses. Yes, no, not currently, but it is a plan for the future, or I don't work in a collision repair facility. Again, those options are yes, no, not currently, but it is a plan for the future, or I don't work in a collision repair facility. And again, I just want to remind you that if you have any questions throughout the presentation, please submit them on your Q&A tab, and we will answer them at the end. Okay, so for our responses, it looks like about a third do have a dedicated area for blueprinting and about 20% do not. So back to Darrell and Shawn.
Very interesting. Of those that are repair facilities, it looks like, what is that, over half actually have areas. That's impressive. This is a photograph here of a product called Matrix Wand, which is a sponsor for this. And again, I'm going to be trying to be careful not to be an endorser of any one piece of equipment, but wanted to make the point of how this particular piece of equipment works. This is a system that, as you can see in the photograph, the person is holding up this. It takes a photograph of the vehicle, utilizes the checkerboard that you can see under the hood for reference points, and it will bring up the photograph of it on the screen on the computer that you can see it behind it, and by clicking on various points, it will then give you the dimensions between those points. And I believe to start out with, you would often color a fastener or some specific point that you wanted to measure. It also comes with some data in it so you can compare to it, and also you can create a lot of your own data. So let's say if you've got a known good side of the car, you can get the dimensions off that and then photograph the other side and do a comparison of the two. And this just kind of dovetails on what Shawn was talking about earlier and the importance of measuring the vehicle and understanding what you're actually dealing with before you go into the repair. Like Shawn, I'll give you an example. I was in a shop this morning. It's 2012 GMC Acadia. This particular vehicle was part of a direct repair relationship. The shop was empowered to tear the vehicle down, and the insurance company was sending an appraiser out to look at it. As they went ahead, tore it down. It was hitting the door and right fender, a little bit of damage going into the area behind the bumper, and so there was a question of whether or not the front end was swung over or not. Standing and looking at it visually, you wouldn't necessarily expect that, but it was difficult to determine just visually. So they used a system. Actually, it was this system, the Matrix Wand, took the photograph of it, highlighted some points. Actually, they used points at the rear of the upper rails and at the front of the lower rails, and within a matter of minutes knew the dimensions, did a cross measure on it, and determined that it was in fact square, and made a printout of it. So when the appraiser arrived, the job was already torn down. They knew the front end was not swung, and they handed a printout to prove that. That's the point that we're making in terms of having some sort of a lighter duty, let's say faster type of a measurement system that can be utilized during the blueprint process. So very quickly you really know the data, you know if there's structural damage there or not, and then you can proceed accordingly. And of course, as you know, the ideal scenario in a blueprint is that you identify all aspects of the repair, get it on that estimate, so that when you start the repair, you can go from start to finish without interruption, including any supplements.
So, Darrell, I have a question for you. Can you measure all three dimensions with that system? And for example, could you measure the frame rails if you wanted to, or suspension parts?
Yes, you could. You can even utilize it for tools such as, let's just say, for example, you've done some repair on it, and maybe you put a blower control arm in the vehicle while it was up in the air. You can use that system to do kind of a pre-alignment measurement to make sure that everything is where it's supposed to be before you have the front alignment done. And it also works on upper body areas.
So my understanding basically is what you can see you can measure with that system. So if you wanted to do underbody, you could raise the car up, mark points, and do underbody as well?
That is correct. That is correct. And in fact, I've even seen evidence that some shops are using it as a marketing tool as well as a measuring tool, in that they're marketing to insurers and customers that they have the ability to do that kind of more accurate estimate promptly, so that before you start the actual repair process, again, you know what you're dealing with and minimizes delays. Okay.
So to wrap up, some conclusions here. Look at all the measuring and straightening equipment options, and we know there are many. It's nice if you can get out to some of the trade shows and see all of them in one place and really talk directly to the people that are familiar with that equipment. You're talking right to the people that designed that equipment in many cases at some of these trade shows. So that's a real efficient way to shop. Consider creating a relationship with a specific manufacturer or supplier, and many of you probably already have those type of relationships in place. And that's something that you can use to your advantage. along with utilizing the size and strength of your MSO for pricing. Economies of scale here can be used to your advantage as well. Consider standardization, but I kind of think you shouldn't get too hung up on standardization where you may have some different pieces of equipment in different areas, especially if you're acquiring new shops and they have some different equipment. That may be something to consider, but you may want to leave equipment like that in place as long as the technician is familiar with it and replace that if the technician leaves or through attrition. Training is very important as well, and I really want to emphasize that, negotiate that you're going to get good training at the time of purchase. Don't just sign and buy a piece of equipment without talking about that training. You want to make sure that you have a commitment from that manufacturer that they're going to train your technicians to really know that equipment well, inside and out, before they leave your facility when they drop that equipment off. Some of the training may take several days on some of this equipment. I kind of liken it to buying electronics. I know people that'll go out and buy the most complicated camera or camcorder or whatever possible that's got all the bells and whistles and features, and they never learn to use all of those features. And with this measuring equipment, you can do some amazing things that will really streamline the process and really give you some good insight into what's going on with that structure if you know how to use all those features. So you want to make sure that your techs are very familiar with that machine, that they know everything about it, not just enough to be dangerous. So really important to have that training in place. Consider speed and convenience as well. And again, some input from your techs will go a long way here. They're the guys that use this equipment. They could probably tell you a lot more about what is easy or difficult to do. Consider separate measuring systems for blueprinting and estimating. So, it's not always easy to have more than one system, but you may want to have a separate system for the blueprinting portion. And we polled you, and it looks like about 30% of you are doing that with electronic systems right now. Consider the need of light pulling as well as heavy structural repair. And a lot of these systems now have what they call either a speed rack or a quick rack, which is kind of a scaled down rack, much lighter duty, that you can do some of the smaller, quicker pulls on, which won't tie up a fixture bench or a drive-on rack for a long period of time. So that's always a nice option to have in your shop as well. Consider other equipment offered, such as welders, squeeze-type welders, all that type of equipment where, if you're purchasing the frame systems or measuring systems, you may have some leverage as well to get a better deal on some of that equipment. Consider current and upcoming DRP requirements. These are changing periodically, so it's a little difficult to keep up with exactly what's coming downstream, but try to know what those requirements are, and just as importantly, know what the upcoming OE certification requirements are. We were just discussing this before this session here today, and it's pretty difficult to keep up with that. Those are rapidly changing as the equipment changes. Sometimes the OEs are just a step behind in approving some of this equipment because it comes out so quickly they haven't had a chance to evaluate it. So if you are in a OE network, might be worth a phone call to talk to whoever's in charge of that network to kind of pre-approve this equipment to see where it's at if it's newer equipment. So that's it for me here today. Really want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to present here. And Darrell, do you have anything else to add to that?
Read this quote from Mike Levasseur, President and CEO of Keenan Auto Body. I thought it said a lot about what's going on in our industry and his perspective as an operator of a fast-growing MSO. Mike is very involved with industry affairs and a very respected person in our industry. As he states, as we acquire shops with existing equipment and as current equipment ages, we replace and or install the same types of benches, fixtures, and electronic measuring systems. We use all specific brand products. This gives us the flexibility to move technicians without the need to retrain. Interesting perspective from somebody who knows his stuff, and again, others may have a little different perspective, but I thought that said a lot about how he approaches frame and measuring systems. With that, we will move on to questions.
Great. Like Darrell said, we'd like to take this opportunity to solicit some questions from our viewers. So if you have a question, simply type it up in the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen and send it to us, and hopefully we'll have time to get through everyone's questions. So to start off, Darrell, can you elaborate on what you think we're going to see in the future in terms of fixed versus universal measuring systems?
Based on a lot of what we're hearing, I would tend to believe that we're going to see more and more fixture systems. As the tolerances become tighter and tighter, it seems to necessitate that. Also makes for a very nice feature for welding structural panels in place. I mean, it's really there. You don't have to constantly measure. You're basically placing the equipment on a fixture so you know it's positioned exactly where it's supposed to be. Interesting involvement in terms of, I should say, how things are evolving with fixtures, in that we used to just see more and more of the dedicated ones where you'd have to rent them, and frankly that system works, but there are some now that are more universal in nature, so you don't have to own as many pieces of equipment, and you're given instructions on how to adjust pointers and different aspects of these fixtures to make them work on different types of vehicles.
Great. And now, Shawn, one for you. If there's no visible damage indicators, is a measurement of a vehicle still necessary?
Yeah, I kind of alluded to that earlier, and this is going to be kind of almost a gut feeling kind of thing where you're going to look at a vehicle and not see those buckles or damage indicators, but either through experience or looking at just the entirety of the collision, you may make that decision to measure, at least get preliminary measurements to make sure that you don't have any structural damage. It's a lot easier to make that quick, simple measurement in the beginning of the process to cover your bases. Then it's going to be later on downstream, again, after a delivery date is in place where everything changes. So there are going to definitely be situations where you're going to have that feeling that this car should be measured even though you don't see those damage indicators. And by the way, you could make some very quick preliminary tape measure type tram bar measurements just to at least see if there's anything obvious before you go ahead with that electronic measuring as well.
Shawn, I know you touched on this a little bit earlier in the presentation, but in terms of training, repair, and service, how important do you think support after the sale is from the manufacturer?
The equipment manufacturer?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's really important. And, one of the things is data. You're going to need data to make these measurements, and that's probably the number one thing is how quickly the equipment manufacturer gets you that data and how much of that data they have and how detailed that data is. Do they have upper body dimensions? Do they have suspension point dimensions? So that's really important. And then as far as service, you're going to want to be able to have close contact where you can get a hold of somebody quickly if you have any questions, or if you need training, you might bring in new employees that you need to have trained. That's something else you might want to write into a contract, is that future employees get some type of training as well. So that support is extremely important. Different piece of equipment, but I talked to somebody recently that bought a welder, and basically they bought it by mail, and it was dropped off at their facility, and then they started making calls to find somebody to train them on that piece of equipment. So you don't want to do that with a frame or measuring system. So you want to make sure that you've got that support system in place.
As well as understanding when something does go wrong, how is it handled? For example, an electronic measurement system, if it needs to be shipped off to some long-distance point to have it repaired, and it's going to be tied up for long periods of time, obviously that's a significant disadvantage to a shop. As an MSO operator, I want to know who I can call right away. I want to get quick service, and I want to get fast turnaround.
That's a great point. Great.
And Shawn, can you measure with the wand while on your frame machine during the repair?
Sure. Yeah, you can. You're not going to be able to get a live reading, but you can go back and double check and see. As you're straightening, you can take another photograph and measure and see where you're at. There may be more efficient ways of doing that depending on what machine you're working on, but you can make some on-the-go checks with that system.
I presume they were referring to the Matrix one, although I'm not sure. We looked earlier at some other systems that are more designed for the actual structural repair that may take a little bit more setup time, but are going to be designed in a way for the actual structural repair. And they might have the flags hanging down. There might be the point-and-click system. And both of those systems will give you measurements while you're pulling. In different forms, as we said, the flags can give you more dimensions, perhaps, require some more setup time, but the point-and-click system, you can still position it in a given point in, let's say, a rail, and pull it, and you can watch the dimensions on the screen as you're pulling it.
Darrell and Shawn, I'm not sure which one of you wants to take this one, but as the collision industry advances into a new technology era, how do we get the insurance industry to buy into the fact that they need to trust our expertise in the fact that a vehicle should be measured?
Darrell, you can have that one.
Oh, thanks, Shawn. I think the key is education. Frankly, insurers, obviously, they have a vested interest in keeping their costs down. We all know that, and understandably so. And it's really, I think, up to us as repairers to educate the insurers. Frankly, I think one good tool to use is, for example, when you buy a new piece of equipment and you're going to have a training session, maybe the manufacturer sends a representative out and you're going to have a number of your staff people there. In a lot of cases, it's a good idea to invite the insurer, or maybe put on a presentation later so that they can see this type of equipment that you're dealing with and understand the time requirements for it. And also, it doesn't hurt that they understand the cost requirements. I mean, a lot of these pieces of equipment, it's pretty easy to spend $50,000-$60,000 on a rack with some few pieces of additional equipment with it, maybe with measuring systems. The measuring systems can be $25,000, $30,000, $35,000. So there's an incredible expense there. And I think the insurer understands that obviously the repairer needs to get a return on their investment. And so you've got to find the common ground so that you can help the insurer understand what it costs to purchase the equipment and operate it in terms of time, and the same time that come up with a pricing system that works for both parties.
Okay. And Shawn, what types of vehicles have tolerances of 1 millimeter?
Well, that's kind of a broad question, but just generally the European vehicles tend to have tighter tolerances. Some may even say 0. And most of the American-made vehicles are 1 to 3 millimeter tolerance, plus or minus 3. But it tends to be the European vehicles that have tighter tolerances, like Mercedes and Audi and Jaguar, et cetera. And by the way, that's something you can find in the service information or through AllData or other sources. So that information is out there. And again, it's individual by vehicle maker, so it's difficult to give a specific answer.
No, it's kind of a generalization, but wouldn't you agree that oftentimes we see the newest technologies, and which often means the closest tolerances on the most expensive vehicles, and then that technology has a way of finding its way into the lesser expensive vehicles. So in all probability, we're going to see closer and closer tolerances on all vehicles in the future. Would you agree with that, Shawn?
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. Everything kind of starts with the more the boutique cars and the more the exotic cars, and kind of trickles its way down into the mainstream vehicles. So yeah, I would definitely see that happening in the very immediate future.
Already I've been hearing some things on some of the new Ford F-150s that are coming, and of course because of their popularity, most of us are going to have to adapt to it. And there's some new technologies, new materials, different methodologies for measuring closer tolerances. It just seems to be a big wave that's coming at us that we need to react to.
I would agree.
Great. Well, that's all the time we have today for questions. We really want to thank Darrell and Shawn for sharing their knowledge and time with us. Also, thanks to those of you who joined us for the webcast. If you'd like to view the webcast again or share it with someone who is unable to participate, it will soon be archived at www.abrn.com/MSO-frame. Once again, that's www.abrn.com/MSO-frame. We'd also like to offer a special thanks to our event sponsor, Matrix Wand, for their support in helping us put on the webinar. So thank you all and have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.